Some of the things that I've seen attempted to be put in prenups that made me laugh and didn't really work was if my spouse changes religions or changes political affiliations, then they waive spousal support or they lose everything.
Wild, wild, wild times.
I've had custody agreements before children even existed try and be put into prenups. Those kind of things don't work out so well. And if you come into my office, at least, I would say, yeah, we're not going to do that.
Right. Welcome back to Legally Uncensored. I'm your host, Demetria Graves, a dedicated Pasadena divorce attorney and owner of the Graves Law Firm. And this season, we're diving deep into the real, raw, and often messy parts of relationships, whether you're entering one in the thick of it or finding your way out. We're calling this season Untangling Hearts and Unveiling Truths, because navigating love, commitment, and sometimes separation takes strength, strategy, and a whole lot of resilience. Today's topic, yes, we're going there. We're talking about the P word. Yep, prenups. With shifting societal roles and evolving ideas around love and money, we thought it was time to break down the stigma and have an honest, uncensored conversation about why prenuptial agreements aren't just for the celebrities or the ultra wealthy, and why signing a prenup does not mean you're planning for your divorce. To help break it all down, I'm thrilled to be joined by Rachel King, a powerhouse attorney, entrepreneur, veteran, wife, and mother. She's a board-certified specialist in estate planning, trust, and probate law, and she's built a reputation as a fierce advocate in the courtroom. Some even call her the king of litigation. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little more about yourself.
I am a mom. I love to run. I really enjoy yoga, but mostly I'm an attorney. I've been in practice and owning my own law firm for over 10 years. I have a huge amount of experience in family law and probate. And I've really gotten to a point in my career where I have like all of this knowledge and I just want to be able to share it with people that might find it useful and helpful, but also people that wouldn't have access to it the way that an attorney does, who sits in court every single day and learns so much. So that's kind of my new mission and what I'm working to do.
And we are the same, hence Legally Uncensored. I try to share as much information as I can. Being in LA, I know a lot of people just cannot afford attorneys. So I try to do my best to get out the information so people are at least informed when they go through this process. We are very, very similar. However, I probably would not be running with you. I will walk, but I probably wouldn't run. I probably wouldn't run. So again, thank you so much for being here and discussing this very important topic with me. I have been on a mission for the last several years to inform people about what a prenup really is. I think there is a lot of bad press about prenups. So before we get started, tell me what you think a prenup is.
So I'll be honest, I don't call them prenups anymore. I call them premarital agreements because I feel like that's maybe more, I don't know, politically correct, but it's also what I am used to seeing in the law. And to me, a premarital agreement is an agreement that two people make and then a contract and then solidify in writing prior to getting married. Oftentimes it mimics the law and what the law would do, but it really sets expectations. One, that the couple has already agreed to verbally, but now we have something that can be enforceable when or if the time comes that emotions run high. In all of my time as an attorney, I've never seen people be able to reach an agreement and form a contract that is exactly as intended when they're in the heat of emotion. And that is what a divorce is. So for me, when I look at premarital agreements, it's what do you expect to have happen if you guys get divorced? And most couples have already talked about it. So let's just put it in writing so that if you find yourself there, what you both expected to happen entering the marriage is what actually can be enforced and can happen at the end of the marriage.
Right. I totally agree with you. And just taking it a step further, even if a couple does not agree to the, I'm going to still call it prenup, to the prenup, I think it's a great way to have a discussion about what everything looks like, what finances look like, what the end of a potential relationship looks like. And I always say, you know, you have car insurance, you have health insurance, you have all these other protections. There's nothing wrong with having the conversation about your relationship. But I will say now, I think I think this current generation gets it, don't you?
Way better than any of the previous
Right.
generations. And I do think that it is a really great tool. In fact, I've had a lot of people that have come into my office over the years and say, I need a prenup. I am going to get married. I want it for my own protection, but I'm so afraid to talk to my fiance about it. I think it's going to blow up. And almost every single time, my response is, if you can't even talk about it before you're going to get married, is this
Right.
really a relationship that you want to take to the next level? So, whether or not you end up signing a premarital agreement or a prenup or not, it should be a conversation that you're willing to have. But I think this current generation is much more independent in at least the sense that they have it, they're going to earn it, and it's okay if they get to keep it, and they're more comfortable asking, saying, hey, I'm bringing this in, I just want to be able to leave with it.
Right. We did a little research around here, and it seems about 40% of the millennials and Gen Z, that tongue twister there, they agree with prenups versus 20% of Gen X and boomers, which was very fascinating to me. But I feel like they're just the enlightened folks around here these days.
It could also be that we have, because of the economy, so many people are expected to work. We are really, you know, generations removed now from the typical stay at home spouse marriage situation. And so, because of that, when you have two people that are really earning, I think it's a lot more comfortable to come in and to say, look, this is what I'm bringing to the table. This is what you're bringing to the table. What's going to end? I also think divorce has gotten so common, right? We have a divorce rate of, I think, over 50% in North America. And so that stigma is gone. So if we know that independence and dual incomes is more of the standard household, and we know that it's almost more likely than not that your marriage is going to end in divorce, even though that's sad and disappointing, it seems sort of normal or accepted to say, okay, so let's just plan for that.
Right. What I've seen, at least in the African American community, black women are still very, very hesitant to proceed with prenups. I've heard reasons such as we prayed about it, or I just don't feel comfortable. And I think because of the shift in economics and education and that sort of thing, I don't know if black women especially don't feel empowered to do so, but I know there's still a lot of hesitation in proceeding with prenups. What is your experience in any community, not just with black women?
I think that the people that tend to feel, not that they do, but that feel like they're bringing less into a relationship tend to be the people that are more hesitant to bring up the discussion. Mm-hmm. And all I would say is you don't even need to bring it up to your fiance. It doesn't need to be an issue, but at least understanding how they work can really be powerful in understanding whether you want to. My sister came into her marriage owning a house almost outright that she'd bought when she was very young and had joined the military. And I said, my goodness, you need to get a prenup. Like, what are you thinking? Your future husband is coming in with nothing, and you own a piece of real estate very near DC, almost outright. Mm-hmm. And we had a conversation about it and I explained how it worked. And at the end of the day, she said, Rachel, I just don't want to do one because I feel like that isn't how I want to define or start my marriage. What I have is my husband's, and I am okay with that. So she didn't do one. Now, whether that position changes if their marriage doesn't work out,
Right.
fortunately, they're still married, who knows? But at least she was given the tools to make an empowered decision. And just like you might go to a church and talk to a pastor about getting married, talk to your family about whether they like this, new spouse or not, or potential spouse, you get so much outside feedback when you're about to get married. I think that we should make it normal to talk to a lawyer, or, my goodness, a simple Google search, ChatGPT these days, and find out how a prenup works
Right.
and if it's something that is going to go with your marriage or not. You don't need to do one, but at
Right.
least have the power and make a decision
Right.
so that you know what your options are.
Right. And I think you answered some of these things, but I was going to give you a misconception and you tell me your thoughts. I think the one I hear most is signing a prenup means you don't trust your partner.
Well, I totally disagree with that. I think just like signing a will doesn't mean that you have any thoughts on who should inherit. I think signing a prenup can clarify communication. When we look at the causes for divorce, the causes for divorce are, the top three are parenting disputes, sexual disputes, or financial disputes. So if you can flip sort of your perspective and say it's more about going in and making sure that we have financial transparency and that we're on the same page, then I think that can really help. A premarital agreement or a prenup lists everything that you come into the marriage with and everything that your spouse comes into the marriage with at the time. And so sometimes having those conversations can be really helpful in just helping the marriage along and having a really great base point for finances that might help actually save the marriage long term.
What are your thoughts on prenups aren't romantic?
I mean, they aren't, right? I don't think I would agree. But I met a couple once who said that from the day, or so I guess probably prior to getting married, they started counseling with a marriage counselor, and they go once a week and they turn it into a date night, and they go out to this fancy dinner before, and then they go to marriage counseling, and they've turned this, what might be considered not the most fun event, into something fun. I had a client once who every week, her and her spouse would sit down and spend 1 hour talking about finances, and they would have their favorite bottle of wine and turn it into a date night too. So I don't think there's anything sexy
Mm-hmm.
about talking about a prenup, but I certainly think that you can add little uh, tricks in there to make it seem or feel less stressful. I also would say, to the extent that you have to bring it up or you want to bring it up, you know your partner. So maybe don't bring it up when they've come home from a really long day, are really stressed out, and just want to unwind. Pick your moment carefully.
Excellent. And I think the number one excuse I hear is I don't want to talk about it because I think it's going to promote a divorce. I think that's laying the groundwork for a pending divorce or a divorce in the future.
I hear that a lot too.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I guess maybe my cynical attorney side is, okay, so let's play that out. You don't want to bring it up now because it might jinx it. Oh, all right. So you don't bring it up now. And you end up getting divorced for whatever reason. It could have absolutely nothing to do with finances. But you owned a business, and now your spouse, your soon to be ex, is going to take half of it. Is that playing out the way you want it to? Or would you like to have that uncomfortable conversation saying, hey, I started this business. It's kind of my baby. I just want to make sure that when, if, not when, sorry, that would be a jinxer. If we get divorced, I want to be able to take my business with me. And for every contract I've ever drafted or worked with in all of the areas of law, it is so much easier to have these kind of conversations when you're getting along. And are you getting along any better right before you guys decide to get married than you would be in any other part of your relationship? Probably not. I don't think there's a really good, I don't have one, maybe you do, answer as to whether somebody thinks it's going to jinx their marriage. I don't personally. I just think you're protecting yourself and that it's okay to be a little bit selfish or be a little bit of a realist in this situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think we have to come away from that stigma how somehow it's tied to a divorce. It's a divorce. It's a conversation just like any other conversation. And sometimes people don't even realize that owning a business that your spouse has an interest once you get married. They don't understand that your labor and what you do and what you put into that business is community property. So without even having this conversation, they don't even know that, or they don't know that, yeah, you may have owned the house prior to, but if you start paying a mortgage during the marriage, now there's a community property interest in that house. So if you don't have these conversations, a lot of these things you may not even know. So the conversation just, from my perspective, puts everything on the table. And as you said, like your sister, if you decide to do it, you don't decide to do it, but at least you know what's on the table and what's at risk and what can potentially happen down the line. And then I think it's important to know what can go into a prenup and what cannot go into a prenup. Because I don't know if you've been listening, but a lot of people are talking about Anthony Edwards, and do you know who Anthony Edwards is, the basketball player?
Yes.
Okay, so he's supposedly, and I don't know if I believe it because I don't think you can do this, at least not in California, but paid his one of the mothers of his children, he paid over $1 million for child support, right? But I don't think what a lot of people realize, you can always modify child support. Spousal support is a different beast, but you can always modify that. So that is one thing that we cannot alter in a prenup. What is your thought on that?
Well, I agree. And for most of the prenups that I've seen or I've participated in the creating, it really does mimic the law.
Right.
So we're going to define what you come into the marriage with. That would be potentially separate property. We're also going to flush out what happens to that separate property. Are your labor commitments to the house you inherited going to create a community property interest, or are you going to be able to separate that out? But for the most part, we're using the prenup to just explain what will happen, and oftentimes it's in accordance with law. With spousal support, I get people, I think almost every single prenup I've ever been involved in, somebody said, well, I never want to pay spousal support. Like, that is my big issue. I don't care about the house or the business. I don't want to pay spousal support. And in California specifically, some states are a little bit different. Texas has, quite frankly, really amazing laws if you want to get out of paying spousal support. So if you can pop over to Texas and get jurisdiction before you're divorced, do that. But in California, I tell people all the time, you're not going to be able to lock out spousal support because
Right.
your prenup, and whether you like this or not, I don't, it's just the law, gets enforced at the laws that are in place at the time that you try and enforce it. So maybe today, as we sit here, if you gave your spouse $1 million, you would never have to pay them spousal support. But in 15 years, you get divorced and the legislators have come in and said, absolutely not. Doesn't matter. That was considered a gift. We're going to look at the finances at the time of divorce. Now that section of your prenup for spousal support isn't going to be enforceable.
Right.
That doesn't mean that the court might not make the same findings through the divorce process, but it's not going to be because of the prenup. And so I think a lot of the things that I found that people are afraid of when it comes to the prenup, really, again, just understanding how they work and their limitations can take some of that fear away and can make them say, oh, yeah, so this is a good idea. I will be protected no matter what. I'm not going to be signing signing my life away to being a stay-at-home parent for 20 years to be left high and dry with no spousal support. They're set up really to protect everybody involved.
Right. And I think the receiving party of spousal support also gets concerned about, wait a minute, I don't want to just receive $500 a month should this end. And that may or may not be the case. But if you talk about it and I think there's ease in that. I think there's comfort in knowing, oh, okay, this person is being reasonable, they're being fair. I kind of know what this looks like if I do decide to stay home or whatever I decide to do. So to me, there's more ease in having the discussion and executing a prenup because Have you had
Well, knowledge is power, right?
right?
So if
Absolutely.
I think with the spouse that isn't expecting that they might need to receive spousal support, an issue that I also see is, well, what if I sign this today and then our dreams come true and we're worth so much money, and now I've just agreed to something 10 years before that really isn't the case now. I again, this is a very common one. I stayed home. I supported my husband for years and years and years. He was able to go out and grow this business that, though it was a separate property asset, is now worth $20 million. I don't think it's fair that I agreed to nominal or very minimal spousal support when we got married. And to all of those people, I would say, you're right, it's not fair. And there's actually legislation and laws and discretion in the court to make sure that it becomes fair and that you are, I don't want to say rewarded, but you're granted your equitable share of, the marital assets or the spousal support.
And those are also things that you can contract for, right? Should the business maintain a value of up to $5 million, then this is what the prenup looks like. If it grows to $100 million, then this is what the interest looks like. So you can contract around those things. It doesn't have to be so rigid that you lose out on anything. There's a way to, and I think that's the beauty of it, right? You can contract to what you can legally contract to. And I think just having a conversation and, like as you said, knowledge is power, you will know that it doesn't have to be so strict that you're scared of it.
Right. And that's why we got away in California with that whole like showing up at the altar with a prenup and being like, hey, sign this or else. We
Right.
don't have those rules in place. It has to be a conversation, it has to be fully executed, it has to be signed. There's this whole timing process in place
Right.
that really is, I think, put in place so that couples have these conversations in advance and are able to really think through what this looks like, what their deal breakers are, what's important to them, and come to an agreement that's going to work for their marriage, considering the real life possibility that it might end.
Right. And I tell everyone a couple of things when you're considering a prenup. You don't have to sign on, as you said, you don't have to sign today because you decided to get a prenup. Definitely get a lawyer, at least to talk to someone. And please don't do it yourself unless, I would say just don't do it yourself. I, I was trying to think of a exception, but I can't. Even if someone just drafts on your behalf, I think it's important to have a professional because there are so many rules, at least now in California, surrounding if a prenup will be valid. If you don't know, you can mess up your contract if you may. So I don't think that's something you should do yourself, but definitely something that one should consider. So what are some tips you have for someone that is kind of on the fence about it? How would you tell them to navigate that process?
Look at what you have now, right? Make a list. It can be on the napkin of just what you have. What are you bringing to the table? Consider the assets that you own. Do you already own a house? Have you contributed to a 401k? What does your annual income look like? And then in your own head, privately, nobody needs to know about it, ask yourself what you would expect if your marriage ended. If you would expect that your spouse gets half of all of the things that you have and you get half of your spouse, maybe you don't need to go farther, but at least give yourself permission to have that fantasy so you can kind of work through it. If you're in a situation where you're really uncomfortable talking to your spouse about it before, or your soon to be spouse, your fiance about it, maybe take the next step and talk to an attorney about it. See what the attorney says. I have had many people who have come into my office and we've talked through the prenup, and really all they want is to make sure that their separate property stays separate. They are okay with any community contributions being split equally. They're okay with child support and they're okay with spousal support. And at that point, it's like, all right, well, we just talked about the law, so that's going to be fine. Maybe you don't even need to have a prenup. So, first step, think about it yourself. Second step, go talk to an attorney, get some information, flesh it out. And if it is something that you want to carry on with and you think is really important to you, take a deep breath and bring it up to your spouse or your fiance. Like everything in the family law space, I think timing is really important. So be careful of your timing. And remember, while you've been thinking about it for a really long time, your fiance hasn't. So it may not be, especially if it's a hard conversation, it may not be appropriate or well received to say, okay, so tonight over dinner, I've decided I want to talk about a premarital agreement or a prenup. Here's everything that I want. Here's everything that I expect. And you need to go get an attorney and talk about it. That's like a lot.
Right.
So maybe bring it up in bits and pieces so you can feel them out and it can be more of a natural conversation, like a pillow talk conversation. And then the last thing, step 4, is just like you said, you've got to have an attorney. It's pretty easy as an attorney to invalidate a prenup that was not executed with both parties having attorneys and that is very, very skewed or has clauses in it that really violate kind of our public policy on equitable distributions and divisions in family law. So if you want it to have any teeth, then both parties should be represented by an attorney. Have, wife get her attorney to sign off on it, husband to get his attorney to sign off on it. I'm using those gender roles just because they're traditional, but I understand it might be different. But each person should really have an attorney signing off on it. Make 2 originals, keep it, and hope you never have to use it.
Right. And I think it's important that your attorney does not recommend an attorney for your fiance. I have had cases where people come in and say they all were working together. I felt forced to sign because her attorney gave me, the recommendation for other attorney. So I make it a habit to not recommend anyone for that purpose. I know sometimes it can come off as a little mean, but I'm not trying to be. I'm just trying to make sure the lines are clear because there are so many rules with prenups. Not to scare you away, but it's important to have this discussion with someone who knows the rules and that can also explain to you that it's not easy to, for lack of a better word, modify your prenup because your prenup is before the relationship. So once you get married, it becomes something else and the rules really change. It becomes what we call a postnup. So it's not as easy to say, yeah, now we have a dog and a cat that I want to include in the prenup. It's just not that easy. I think that becomes a whole different contract. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. And I tell people I can't represent both of you, right? I'm sure you've gotten it too, or can't you just do it for both of us? It's fine. We're agreeing on everything. It's very easy. That's not in your best interest. And it can seem really expensive to have to pay 2 separate attorneys for 2 separate signatures. But it's a whole lot cheaper, I promise you, than dealing with a contested divorce down the road, like probably exponentially cheaper. So if all you can do is a Google search, do a Google search, find an attorney, call them. It's not a litigated issue, so you don't necessarily need a specialist. You want an attorney that can explain the law to you, tell you what your prenup says, and make sure you understand what it is you're agreeing to. And that's pretty much the extent of what you need an attorney for in a prenup. So you both should have your own attorney for the most effective document. And I will say to everybody that is like, oh, shoot, I should have gotten a prenup and I didn't. You can do a postmarital agreement, right? And I don't think that that's something to be afraid of either. I've seen it where, I know this is not the topic and what we're talking about, but I've seen it where people were so close to divorce, and getting a post-marital agreement saved the relationship because of the financial strain on it. So I really hope that we can get to a point where having these conversations with your spouse or your fiance can become healing and helpful in the relationship, rather than these big taboo subjects. I don't think anybody should be ashamed of asking to have a prenup signed or signing a prenup. And there seems to be a lot of shame on both sides.
I agree. And I want to talk a little bit about what actually goes in a prenup. And I don't know about you, but I'm starting to see a lot of discussion about pets in prenups. So, outside of the norm, like spousal support and assets, and now pets, what have you seen added to prenups?
I've seen a lot of specific division of like property, like specific, not assets, right? In the traditional sense,
Right.
but things that have emotional value. I've seen a lot of. I even had a couple once that said that the family portraits were going to be duplicated at the cost of the marital estate, if you will, so that both parties got to take their own pictures, their own copies of the pictures. I think it really comes down to what is important to you at the time. Some of the things that I've seen in, or I've seen attempted to be put in prenups that made me laugh and didn't really work, was if my spouse changes religions or changes political affiliations, then they waive spousal support or they lose everything. I've had custody agreements before children even existed try and be put into prenups. Those kind of things don't work out so well. And if you come into my office, at least, I would say, yeah, we're not going to do that.
Right.
But I do see a lot of pets, and I think pets, especially when they are involved where there's no children or after the children have grown, can be a huge source of contention because of the emotional attachments.
I do have a case right now where that is the biggest fight because one of the spouses wants to relocate by the water and take the dog, and the other spouse wants the dog as an emotional support. So pet litigation can actually get bigger than custody litigation in the next few years.
Well, and we have the laws, right? I think
Right,
California might be one of the first states that has the ability for a family law court to make custody orders
right.
for pets that are part of a divorce. It doesn't work for boyfriend girlfriend situations, but I do think it's interesting because part of the law, at least in my experience, still treats pets like property, no different than maybe your fork or knife. But then we have this huge emotional impact that pets have. And now we have these separate laws that say, well, in a divorce, if it's a pet, as we define pet, then we might have custody and visitation orders.
Wild, wild, wild times. I can sit, Rachel, and talk to you forever about prenups, but our time is coming to an end. So, what are some of your last thoughts about the topic, and what are maybe three or four things you really want people to know about prenups and the stigma of prenups and helping us alleviate those stigmas?
I'm a big advocate of financial independence for people everywhere. I think if you have any sort of financial independence, it really bleeds into other positive areas of your life with a sense of control, a sense of purpose, a sense of overall success. And we all get to define what financial independence means for us. If you can consider a prenup the same as a business partnership agreement or a will, or really any responsible planning to keep you or help get you on your journey to how you define financial independence, I think it will be more approachable and it won't be quite as scary. Think about it for what it is, take the emotion out of it, And you can love your partner and have the most amazing marriage, and then separately also have a conversation about what your financial independence is and empower yourself with that. Be proud of what you can bring to the table. Be whether that is financial resources or that is your ability to support the house on the inside. Be proud of what you bring and protect yourself, because if you protect yourself, you're going to be protecting your future marriage, your children, and your future self, your future life.
So, Rachel, have you had a situation where a prenup has saved the day? And because the parties did the work and unfortunately the marriage came to an end, but because they had a prenup, they didn't enter into years and years of litigation?
I've had a couple of them actually, and they're really stressful, but the similarities that each of these couples had is that they signed a premarital agreement or a prenup, they got married, and then they found themselves in a divorce that was incredibly contentious. They did not like each other. They couldn't get along. It was a fight over who was going to move out of the house, who was going to stay. There was potential for a lot of domestic violence to be involved just because of the toxicity and the hostility that was or had become the relationship leading to the divorce. And in each of these situations, I had one of the parties come into my office and I explained, and they brought the prenup. And, one was the party that said, no, I want to get spousal support forever and I am entitled to all of his inheritance. And, the rash things that people say sometimes just because they're so angry and filled with emotion. And then I've had the other side, right? And one of the other couples, it was the party that would have paid support, and it was, I'm not going to pay a dime, everything I have is for me. My spouse stayed home and was an alcoholic and would refuse to get a job and is an addict and all of the things. So angry. In every single situation, when I sat them down and I said, but here's the prenup that you signed, here's what it means, and you can be irate with the fact that this is an enforceable document. Be mad at your past self. But right as we sit here today, here is the reality of your situation. And all of these feelings really come from a place of anger and grief and all of the emotion that comes from divorce. But over a few weeks of having these different conversations and making sure that questions got answered, in all three of those cases, all of the parties ended up coming together and saying, oh, I do have a valid prenup. I don't want to fight about this. And as upset as I am, I'm not going to fight the validity of the prenup, because if I do and I lose, in these particular cases, they were all executed very well and were likely to be considered valid. Then my whole case is, I've spent all of this money. And so we were able to stop the litigation pretty much before it ended, divide everything pursuant to the prenup, and come to an agreement on some of the other issues like spousal support, child support, that had direction not only in the prenup, but also from the statutory laws we have in California. All of them ended. I think we had 1 day in court for each of them. And then after that, the judge gave a tentative ruling, or kind of some insight into where they were thinking. We were able to reach agreements on all of them. No more days in court. I think the highest cost on those of the three was like $5,000 in attorney's fees, which is really good.
Very good in California. To the contrary, if you don't, you're looking at 20, 30, $50,000 in fees, multiple days of litigation, and that's just to contest if the prenup is valid or not. That doesn't even get into the issues of your dissolution. To the flip side of that, I had a case recently where someone didn't want to pay their spousal support. And I think sometimes women struggle with that. They don't want to pay spousal support. And I understand. However, in California, it doesn't say just men pay spousal support. And there was no prenup. So because there were no limits, it goes by law. And in California, for temporary support, the court uses our wonderful new system, ex-spouse. They put in what you make, they put in what your spouse makes, and what comes out for temporary support. And so this person was paying over $3,000 a month in spousal support and having a complete tantrum because they did not want to pay or did not understand the amount. And this goes back to having a discussion ahead of time so you are aware of your exposure. The court might sympathize with you and, tell you so sorry, but the order is the order. And so if you don't prepare, you might be unpleasantly surprised should you face your day in court.
Absolutely. And I think one of the issues that I've seen come up a lot, it's supported by law, but I think it can be flushed out in a prenup, is this anticipated inheritance and how that plays out in all of the other issues. Inheritance is mostly considered separate property unless you maybe commingle it or do something, but it can impact spousal support, child support, asset division. And so if you know that you're going to be receiving some kind of inheritance, you have or you anticipate doing it, a prenup can really help just clarify those issues so that if you get to a divorce, you're not litigating something that shouldn't be a litigated issue. We shouldn't be spending money, time, and energy on something like inheritance or anticipated inheritance.
I agree with you. And I just want to say, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on and sharing my views on premarital agreements and just having discussions and being informed and knowing what your assets and what your relationship ultimately looks like during and post relationships. I think Rachel and I share the common goal of educating as many people as we possibly can and understanding what this looks like. And unfortunately, if you go to court, most of these courts have anywhere from 12 to 20 cases on calendar. They are not going to sit and cry with you and pat you on your head and give you big hugs. So it's important that you inform yourself ahead of time so you know what to expect. So Rachel, thank you so much again for coming on Legally Uncensored, and hopefully you'll join us again.
Yes, thank you so much. I had a great time and always happy to give my insight. Maybe next time we'll pick a subject we disagree on just so we can have a little fun.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, I hope today's episode gave you something to think about. Whether you're single, engaged, or married, prenups aren't about expecting failure. They're about planning with clarity, honesty, and protection. Big thanks to Rachel King for joining us and giving us a grounded, honest take on the topic that doesn't always get the nuance it deserves. All right, that wraps this episode of Legally Uncensored. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review if this conversation resonated with you, and share it with someone who could use it. And remember, you deserve strategy, not survival. I'm Demetria Graves. Until next time, stay empowered, stay informed, and stay uncensored.